Alrighty, welcome back everyone who watches this, and I'm just going to do a quick video on how to wire your own riding mower, since I've got the oil changing on it right now. And I do this for some people who, just want all the safeties removed on them, because on a mower this old, it's rusting out and everything. It's just old, and the safety switches are going to fail at some point. And a lot of times it is really just easier just to wire it yourself and change around some things. So basically you're going to have a few important key components that are going to translate across every single riding mower. And that's going to be, your key switch over here, which I just dropped it down so I can show you later. You're going to have a starter solenoid, starter obviously on your engine. You're going to have an ignition coil kill wire, and then obviously you're going to have your battery way in the back, and an inline fuse. Those are just sort of the key components that you're gonna have to have. And so your inline fuse is already going to come with, I think, of just every riding mower in general. I haven't yet to come across one that isn't. And basically what you're going to want to do is just go ahead, strip out every single wire that isn't, your battery cable wires. That are, if it's a big thick wire, just go ahead and leave it. You don't need to touch it or anything. And you're going to want to leave on your riding mower, you're going to want to leave your kill wire, and you're going to want to leave the bigger, thicker wire, because the small wire, that just runs your lights, and on this old mower, yeah, there's no lights left, so there's no point in keeping that. So just worry about the bigger, thicker wire. I'd left it in there in case the customer ever wants to, change it out or whatever, in case they would like to, have that option at some point, which they probably won't, but it doesn't matter. And basically, we're just going to start all the way at the beginning from the battery side, and we're going to work our way through what you need for your riding mower. So on starter solenoids, you don't have to do anything with the wiring past your starter solenoid to the battery. All of that's already going to be just fine. And now there are 4-post starter solenoids, and there are 3-post starter solenoids. And they're the exact same thing, except for on your 4-post, you'll notice back there that the ground wire just goes right to the bottom of the starter solenoid post, and there's no difference. You can have them either which way. It will not affect it. All it needs is power and ground. And obviously this one has ground, and you can swap them, doesn't matter. As long as it's got those two things, it can work. Now you're noticing there's 2 wires coming off of the battery side, and we can get to those in a minute, and they're going to be very important in a second. And then on your starter side, the side that goes straight all the way up to your starter, you're going to go ahead and leave that side alone, and don't worry about it. And your other wire, this orange wire, it can be whatever color, it doesn't matter, but it's going to be a wire that goes from your post, one of your posts on your starter solenoid, the itty bitty little spade connector ones, and it's going to go up to your key switch. And I guess we'll go ahead and mention these other 2. One of these wires is going to come from that big wire that I mentioned earlier on your comes from your alternator. These 2 wires produce power. This one produces protected DC power. The other one produces AC power to run headlights. So yes, your headlights are whatever voltage it produces, it doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about that. That can be used for just about anything. So if you want to power, your own lights or whatever, but don't get anything expensive or picky, because it's a riding mower. It's not going to produce the cleanest voltage for you. But basically all you do is you take your thick wire that as it comes out from your connector, and you run it all the way around back to your starter solenoid post. And that's how you can charge your battery. Now the other big wire is what provides power to our key switch. So this one back here goes straight to your key switch. And that one you're going to want to have an inline fuse on, because if you get a surge of power and it goes through the loop, it is going to short out your system. And I know what you're thinking, well what about the wire that goes straight over to the, from the alternator? Well, that's sort of kind of defeats the purpose, but because we have that fuse there, it's going to shut it off before anything else happens. Because if you lose power to your key switch, nothing will ever happen. You need to have power to your key switch to operate your riding mower. And so we'll get to the most important part, the key switch. So now on your key switch, it doesn't matter if it's the big plastic covered ones on your Craftsman's, Husqvarna's, John Deere's, whatever. They all serve the same purpose. They're going to have little letters around the side. I don't know if this one will focus because it is very close combat. But you'll notice, I don't know if you can make that out. You can see S, you can see Y, A. I don't know if it'll get there, but just trust me on this. You'll notice that there will be a G for ground, and on these ones it'll just be some offshoot wire. Obviously, you just take that wire. In my case, I just took it to the other side of the starter solenoid down there and just ground it out wherever. Find a spot, clean it off, take a screw to it, secure it, and ground it. And then that will be how your riding mower shuts off, basically. And there will be an M wire, which will stand for magneto, and that's where your other wire from the engine side, your black wire from your magneto, gets run all along. And you just run it straight to your connector. Or run it straight to your key switch, my bad. And then you're going to have, well, yeah, so we got ground, you've got magneto. There'll be B for battery, and that's where the one from the others, the fuse, the inline fuse wire, that's your battery supply power, because that's your battery wire right there. And that supplies power to those two other wires. And obviously your alternator is protected, so it will send power when it's running. And that's how your system charges, yeah. And then you've got your inline fuse, which comes up to the B terminal on your key switch, on the back of your key switch. And then that will basically get your riding mower to start. So now you've got, like, L is for lights. So if your key switch is a 4 position, so you'll have, you know, off, lights, or reverse, or whatever other option. And then you'll have just run, and then you'll have start. So if you want to get into wiring your lights or your, you know, your shut-off solenoid or anything else like that, then you can, you know, worry about that more, but you don't need to worry about those at all. The only wires you need to worry about are, you know, your ground, your black wire, your starter solenoid wire, which is the orange wire I was talking about back there, that goes to the little spade connector on the back of your starter solenoid. So you just run one wire over there. And that'll be on the S, which stands for solenoid or starter, whatever. It's the same thing. So yeah, you really only need 4 wires on your key switch. And sort of the other components that you got is, you know, you've obviously got on the bottom of your carburetor there, you've got a fuel shutoff solenoid. And all that is, whether it's a 1 wire, 2 wire, however many wires, is it's just a powered circuit, basically. You've got a positive side, and then you've got a grounded out side. And normally, it'll obviously run up to that connector there and ground out, but you don't need to. And what you can do, you can just cut the tip off of those when you take them off the bowl. It'll work just fine. I promise there won't be any issues. And you're like, well, then it's going to backfire when it runs, you know, you shut it off. But there's really no downside to it so much. I mean, it's a riding mower. It's not that important. If you want, you can keep it. Just run a power wire from, I think Y is what it is on these. But you can just, you know, break out your multimeter and see whichever one of your posts gets power when you turn it into the on position or the lights position, just when you turn it on in general. And then you'll take a wire from there and just run it over to your solenoid, because replacing those solenoids is kind of stupid expensive. It's like $100 if you want one that actually works. You know, those aftermarket ones, they just hit or miss, very hit or miss, and mostly miss. And usually it's just easier to cut them off and keep it easy like that. Then, you know, same case with your lights. You know, you run your wire from your alternator and just go over to your lights, positive to one side, negative from the other side, ground them out. And then you'll obviously have to have, you know, well, you run it from here to your key switch with your lights. And then you're going to you run it from your key switch with the L. So that's actually going to be a double wire, more or less. And yeah, don't worry about the lights. You know, it's not a big issue. And that's basically how you wire a riding mower. I don't think there's really anything too fancy about it. And I guess one thing you can do I'll do for the last bit of this video is sort of how to diagnose whether or not it is, an ignition coil or if it's on the electrical side of your riding mower. And the way you can do that is sort of like the first thing I do with diagnosing a riding mower is I'll spray, starting fluid into there, if it spins over, obviously, and we'll see if it starts. If it doesn't start, then usually it's going to be an ignition coil, spark plug, whatever. And the way you can test that, it's super easy. Pop the cover off, that cover over there, just pop it off, and then just remove this wire down here. Now, do not have your fuel source turned on or hooked up or whatever, because if you have this wire disconnected, there is nothing to tell your engine to stop running. And almost 9 times out of 10 anyway, it's usually a failed ignition coil, or I'd say probably 8 out of 10 times it's just because it's a dirty, old, rusty, destroyed spark plug that's never been changed. So, that's sort of how you do it. And then if that doesn't work and it still doesn't run, you still don't have, or wait a minute, hold on. Yeah. So if it does work, when you unplug it, then it's not your ignition coil. You know that if you have this wire unplugged and it still doesn't work, then you have a problem with your ignition coil or your spark plug, or somewhere in between. And, so if it's on this side, 9 times out of 10, it'll probably just be the key switch has failed, or it's got a bad ground, no power or whatever, battery's not hooked up well. And if you replace that, or if you test it, you should just test it just to make sure it's easier. Hook up your multimeter, set it to resistance, and then see what the resistance between your your magneto, and your wire over here is. If it's, over, I'd say probably 3 ohms, it should be somewhere right about 0.5 ohms. If it's way over that, then you've got a break in your wire, and then you need to go over to your starter switch and see if that's bad. And make sure that you've obviously got good grounds. The main place to start is make sure you've got power and ground. If you don't have either of those, or well, if you're missing one or the other, because that results in the same thing, then nothing's going to work. And that's basically how you take care of all the electrical on a riding mower. And one thing to note is that you're not always going to have a diode. Some of these mowers will have a regulator rectifier, and they will produce the same DC voltage. You'll have 2 wires coming off of them. There'll be a little block on the side, and you'll have 2 wires coming in, 2 wires coming out. It's the same procedure on those. It's just that a regulator rectifier produces much cleaner electricity. So if you have a regulator rectifier, it's just some itty-bitty little block. And in the case of this, it would fit right here normally on these Briggs engines if it came with it, but it doesn't have that. Same exact concept, just a little cleaner. So that'll be all. Thank you for watching, and catch you next time.